Atlanta's Earnest Marks character, aka Earn, has to be one of the strangest protagonists I've ever seen in a television series. This character exists as a walking contradiction. He's very intelligent, smart, but perpetually broke. He spends almost the entire first season of the series living in a storage unit. Just as the name implies, he's trying to earn something. Money, respect, maybe even love. But the world he exists in never really pays out. After watching this series, having a couple of years to think about it and read about it, I'm starting to think that the failures of Earnest Marks were the entire point of his story. It may even be the case that the story of Earnest Marks is in part the sum of the fears and anxieties and frustrations that come part and parcel to chasing success, art, and identity. What's good, tinfoilers? Nautilus here, and it's time we dived into a character that I've been wanting to dissect since the channel's beginning. But before we get started, allow me to shout out the channel patrons that you see here for making this whole operation possible. Thank you so much for your generosity. Also, bear in mind that this will be a spoiler-heavy video, as you might have already guessed. Just a heads up for those who haven't seen the series yet, and I suggest you do. It's good stuff. Now that we've got that out of the way, it's time to dive.
Hey man, you gotta get up.
Based on the events of the first season, it becomes very clear that this Earnest Marks character is all about struggle. Fans of the show were quick to point out over on Reddit that his name has a bit of irony to it. It appears that he may have been given this name for a very specific reason. And when you think about it, it's almost too perfect. It's right on the nose. His first name is Earn, which is also a verb that means to work hard to deserve something. And his last name, Mark, suggests a target. Either way, the name implies that there is a destiny waiting for this character. We learn that he at one point attended Princeton, but Earn managed to get himself into some trouble. This was an opportunity to take an off-ramp that begins his journey down a long road of L's. Now, the real-life Donald Glover is an accomplished musician, director, and actor with a long list of wins under his belt. But the character he plays in Atlanta is a far cry from a world-famous globetrotting Grammy/Emmy winner. You would think that given his real-world background, Donald Glover would be a natural for this role, and you'd think he'd want to play the paperboy character. But no, he chose to play his cousin and manager instead. Donald Glover is quoted as saying, "I want to talk about hip-hop without being the rapper." This was a Rotten Tomatoes interview. He chose this part because he wanted to be in the position of the outsider, an observer, much like the audience. In this way, he becomes our perspective into this world. What was really interesting is that I found out that Glover admits that he tricked FX into letting him create the story the way he truly wanted to. I knew that FX wanted a funny show about rappers. I was Trojan horsing FX. Very clever when you think about it, but in this way, Glover was able to almost sneak in the real story he wanted to tell, despite being engaged with a system that often doesn't care what the creator wants. It seems to me that Glover is interested in being his own shadow here. Giving himself the viewpoint of the outsider allows him to tell the story in a very different way. An alternate reality where Donald Glover doesn't achieve the level of success he did in real life. One of the things that you notice early on in the series is how surreal many of the episodes are. There's almost this magical reality that exists in this world. Many of the events seem too insane to be real. On paper, it does seem like a strange choice, but it adds a lot to the storytelling because it reflects just how strange life can be for these main characters. To quote Glover, "The thesis was to show people how it felt to be black, and you can't really write that down. You have to feel it." This explains the dreamlike feel that many episodes of the show tend to have, especially in season 3. Hiro Murai called season 3 a ghost story, because you do get the sense that Ernest is a ghost that moves between dreams and reality. But this is more metaphoric because he's moving between success and failure, but he spends most of his time caught in the limbo in between. To be honest, Ern's entire journey feels like he's trying to wake up from a world of delusion and poverty, and the shame that often comes with that. So it's been established that Earn is not the artist, he's the artist's manager. A position we usually associate with control, strategy, and of course, money. But that isn't exactly his experience throughout most of the series. Instead, Earnest faces near constant setbacks and humiliations. Little known fact, Donald Glover had actual hip-hop insiders involved to get the scenes right when it comes to the life of a manager. This is why they come off as so authentic. He wanted to make sure that what we witnessed was as legit as possible on screen. And I think this was a key part of the message on the subject of the hustle, an idea that usually encompasses alternative means of making money and a 24/7 work ethic. You're on all the time. But in Atlanta, Glover tries to expose the hustle for what it really is, a trap. And this is ultimately why Earn keeps stepping on rakes. Earn does everything right, but he still keeps losing. He used his noodle, pursued his ambitions with the persistence of an angry chihuahua, but no dice. But if there is one constant bright spot in Earn's life, it's his daughter Lottie. This is the single realest thing in his life, but it's also a constant reminder of his failures as a father as he struggles to provide for her, not for lack of trying, of course. I love the fact that Earn never gives up when it comes to this part of his life. He's always trying to be a better father no matter how many times he falls down. And the story is written in such a way that it does not make that easy for him, but he never gives up. Glover talks about fatherhood in his own life, and he refers to it as a test of honesty, a statement that, honestly, completely changed the way I saw this story. There is the theme of struggling towards success from a financial or career perspective in this story. But this statement reveals that the Earnest Marks story is really about honesty and whether or not you can hold on to that honesty on your way to success. Is it possible to admit who you are and keep yourself intact while you're out there earning? Judging by the journey of Earnest Marks, I would say the answer appears to be yes. One element of the story that I think is necessary to discuss so we can sort of sew things up is why he chose Atlanta and some of the other choices related to that. The story obviously has to take place in a Black community in America, but there are Black communities and neighborhoods all over this country, so why did he choose ATL in particular? Well, besides growing up in the suburb of Atlanta, according to Glover, it's because Atlanta is a microcosm of America. He says, I quote, "It has everything America has all in one city." The goal here was to create the perfect place to talk about themes that were relatable. Another is the all-Black writing staff that was hired. They were able to bring the city's contradictions on wealth and poverty and the subject of survival to light from a Black perspective. I knew I wanted people with similar experiences who understood the language and the mindset of the characters in their environment. Part of the aim here was to show how the concept of upward mobility doesn't always work the way we were promised it would. And it's very evident when watching the show that Earn is grounded in the culture of the city through the references that he makes that only someone with experience with Atlanta life would understand. But these choices were also an opportunity to subvert the expectations of the audience and avoid a lot of unnecessary cliches. When the show moves to Europe in season 3, note how the mood/feel doesn't change all that much. We're halfway around the globe, but the Atlanta vibe remains. That's because wherever Earn goes, the ghosts of Atlanta travel with him. By the end of season 4 of Atlanta, Earn is doing all right. He's got a better job, he's got a little money in his pocket, and he's found his little nugget of peace in life for a change. But the one thing he never gets is closure. I think that's very telling regarding the overall message with this character. I don't know if I would call what Earn ends up with a win, at least not by conventional standards, and certainly not by the standards he seemed to have set for himself early on in the story. I do think that there is a point being made here in this. Earnest's reward in this world is a sense of peace or stillness, a state that isn't always easy to come by for people like him. Yes, there are fewer fires to put out and fewer sleepless nights. He doesn't end up super rich or famous by the end of the final episode. Earn's gift to the audience is that he shows us what it is like to chase meaning in a world that only wants to measure you by your wallet. Maybe the fact that Earn never made it to the big time wasn't exactly a failure, but it was more like a price tag, the cost he needed to pay to recognize that in his own way, he's crossed that finish line. Thank you for watching this behind the scenes character breakdown. If you enjoyed this video, you already know what to do. Special thanks to the channel patrons and the entire Tinfoil family for your love and support. Be safe out there, and until we meet again, off you go.